She felt it happen the way you feel a candle go out in a dark room. Not with noise, not with warning, with the sudden, total absence of warmth. Josie was in the kitchens when it happened, 3 floors below the great ceremony hall, surrounded by the smell of wood smoke and fresh bread, her hands still damp from the washing basin, her heart still foolishly, desperately full of something she had no right to be carrying. Hope. She had told herself not to hope. She had repeated it every morning for the past 3 weeks, like a prayer she didn't believe in. He is a king. You are nobody. Whatever you shared in the dark does not survive the light of a ceremony hall. She had said those words so many times that they had almost started to feel true. Almost. Then the bond snapped, and every careful wall she had built came down in an instant. It was not a gradual fading. It was not a gentle pulling away. It was a tearing, sharp, sudden, intimate in the worst possible way, as though something that had been woven into the center of her chest had been ripped out by the root. Josie pressed her fist against her sternum and bent forward over the kitchen counter, her breath gone, her vision swimming at the edges. Somewhere above her, in a hall draped with black and silver banners, surrounded by hundreds of wolves and the weight of an entire kingdom's expectations, Roman Stoneheart was marking another woman. She felt every second of it. The press of his intention through their shared bond, the warmth that had always been hers, flowing in a different direction entirely. The severing of something she had believed, despite everything, was permanent. His choice had a name, Macy Redcliffe. The name moved through Josie like cold water. Noble-born, beautifully connected, the daughter of one of the 3 most powerful families in the Ashcroft territories. Everything Josie was not, everything she had never pretended to be. She stood upright slowly. Her hands were shaking, but only slightly, and she was glad there was no one in the kitchen to see it. She untied her apron. She folded it neatly on the counter. She did not cry. She had learned, a long time ago, that crying was a luxury that required safety, and she had never been quite safe enough to afford it. She walked out the servants' door without looking back, and 3 floors above her, in the middle of a marking ceremony, watched by every noble family in the realm, the Alpha King went completely still, because the bond connecting him to the only woman he had ever loved had just gone silent. The Stoneheart Castle had been alive with preparation for 2 weeks before the night everything fell apart. Josie had watched it happen from the edges, the way she watched most things, quietly, from a careful distance, making herself small so that the noise and the spectacle and the endless parade of noble guests could wash past her without catching on anything. She was good at being invisible. She had been practicing since she was 9 years old. The banners had gone up first. Black silk and silver thread, the colors of the Stoneheart dynasty, hung from every window and battlement until the castle looked like it was dressed for a funeral. The nobles arrived next, carriages and horses, and the particular kind of noise that people make when they are important and want everyone nearby to be aware of it. The great hall had been transformed over 3 days, scrubbed and polished, and filled with enough candlelight to make the stone walls look almost warm. Almost. Josie had scrubbed some of those walls herself. She had not let herself think too hard about what she was preparing. When her hands were busy, her mind was easier to manage. She had focused on the work, the candles, the table linens, the extra kitchen staff that Hallie Thornfield had brought in from the village, all sharp elbows and unfamiliar faces clattering around the kitchen where Josie usually worked alone. Hallie was the head housekeeper, a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s, with a voice like gravel and a heart like warm bread. She had been the one to take a chance on Josie 2 years ago, when Josie had appeared at the castle gates with nothing but a change of clothes and the kind of quiet stubbornness that either got you work or got you sent away. Hallie had seen something in her eyes and said, "Kitchen, dawn tomorrow. Don't be late." Josie had not been late once in 2 years. She had also not told Hallie about Roman. She had not told anyone about Roman. Their relationship had no language for what it was, because it had never been meant to exist in the first place. It had begun, of all things, with a glass of water. Roman Stoneheart had appeared in the kitchen doorway 14 months ago at midnight, wearing a plain dark shirt with the collar undone, looking nothing like the Alpha King who presided over council meetings with a face carved from absolute authority. He had looked tired, genuinely, humanly tired. The kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with carrying too much for too long. He had asked, quietly and without ceremony, if there was any water that didn't come from the formal dining service, because he was sick of things that required a servant to pour them. Josie had handed him a cup from the regular kitchen shelf without comment. He had sat down on the counter, the king on the kitchen counter, like a perfectly ordinary person, and said, "Thank you. What's your name?" "Josie." "Just Josie?" "I've never needed more than that." He had looked at her for a moment, with those amber eyes that the nobility spent a great deal of time either admiring or trying to avoid, and then he had said, "I haven't introduced myself to anyone as just a person in so long I'm not sure I remember how." "You're doing fine so far," Josie had said. And that had been the beginning. It had grown in the way that real things grow, not in grand declarations or dramatic moments, but slowly, in stolen hours and quiet spaces. He came back to the kitchen on nights when the weight of the crown was too heavy to carry to sleep. She was almost always there, because she had never been much of a sleeper either, and because the kitchen was the one place in the castle where she felt entirely herself. They talked. About small things first, the weather, the strange behavior of the castle ravens, a book she had found in the servants' library. Then about larger things. He told her about his father, who had built a kingdom of perfect political architecture, and died without a single genuine connection to show for it. She told him about the orphanage where she had spent her childhood, the headmistress who had looked at her with a kind of instinctive unease that Josie had never been able to explain the day she walked away at 17 and did not stop walking for 3 days. "How did you know to come here?" he had asked once. "I didn't," she had said honestly. "I just kept moving north until I ran out of road." The bond had formed on a night in late autumn, 6 months into their secret. Neither of them had planned it or asked for it. They had been in the library, the fire burning low, Roman reading aloud from a book of old pack histories that he found tedious, but thought she might find interesting. She had fallen asleep in the chair across from him, and he had put the book down and watched her sleep with an expression she didn't see but somehow felt, even in the dark of unconsciousness. When she woke, he was still watching. Their eyes had met in the firelight, and the bond had clicked into place like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting for a very long time, for exactly that key. They had both felt it. The sudden, overwhelming expansion of feeling, like a room you didn't know was small, suddenly losing all its walls. She could feel his steadiness, his depth, the particular quality of his attention when it was directed entirely at her. He had told her later that what he felt in the moment the bond formed was the closest thing to peace he had experienced since childhood. "We have to be careful," he had said, when the wonder had settled enough for words. "My mother, the council, the noble families, none of them will accept this. Not yet. I need time to find a way." "I understand," Josie had said. "I will protect you," he had said. "I promise you but that." She had believed him. 3 months later, she was in the kitchen with her hands in the washing basin when the bond tore open, and she understood that some promises are broken, not by the people who make them, but by the world that surrounds them. The night of the ceremony, Josie had asked to work alone. Hallie had given her a long, not quiet look, the kind that said she noticed more than she said, and had nodded and assigned the extra staff to the upper floors. Josie had stayed in the kitchen. She had told herself she was choosing not to feel it, choosing not to listen for the bond, choosing to be practical and clear-eyed and sensible. She had been telling herself that right up until the moment it became impossible. After, she stood very still for 30 seconds. She counted them. 1, 2, 3. She thought about the first night in the library. She thought about the way he said her name. Not just Josie, but Josie. Like it was complete. Like it was enough. She thought about the pressed flower he had left on her windowsill 3 weeks ago, wrapped in a scrap of paper that said, "For when things feel impossible." She thought about the hope she had been trying so hard not to carry. Then she untied her apron, folded it on the counter, and moved. Her room took 40 seconds to clear. She owned very little. A change of clothes, her worn boots, the small knife she kept under the mattress out of old habit. She took the flower from the windowsill. She tucked it into her pocket. She did not know why she took it. She was angry enough to leave it. But her hand reached for it anyway, the way a person reaches for warmth when they are very cold, even when they are trying to convince themselves they don't feel the cold at all. She walked out through the servants' passage, past the herb garden, past the outer gate, and into the dark mouth of the Darkwell forest, without a backwards glance. The moment the tree line closed behind her, she ran. The bond stretched like pulled thread with every step. She willed it to snap. She pushed against it with everything she had. All her hurt, all her fury, all the exhausted grief of a person who had allowed themselves, despite knowing better, to believe that things were going to be different this time. The bond held. It thinned. It dimmed. But it did not break. Josie ran until her lungs burned, and then she kept running. 3 floors up, in the great ceremony hall, the applause was still echoing off the stone walls. Roman Stoneheart stood on the dais with Macy Redcliffe's wrist in his hands, and the hollow, terrible knowledge settling into his chest that he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had thought the distance would protect her, but he had thought that if Josie simply didn't witness the ceremony, if she was safely in the kitchens, if the bond signal was muted by floors of stone and the noise of hundreds of wolves, he had thought it would be bearable for both of them. Temporary. Something he could explain. He had not understood, until this moment, that the bond did not care about floors of stone. She had felt every syllable. And now the thread connecting him to her was moving, fast, desperate, northwest, and carrying with it an emotion he had never felt from her side of the bond before. Not sadness, not even heartbreak. Gone. She was gone before he had taken his next breath, and the sound that rose in his chest was something between a wolf's howl and a man's cry, swallowed behind a composed expression and the fixed amber gaze of a king who couldn't, was in front of 400 witnesses, fall apart. His captain of the guard, Dominic Blackridge, was at his shoulder within minutes of the ceremony's close. Dominic was a solid, quiet man, with a scar along his left jaw, and the kind of steadiness that made him invaluable in exactly this sort of moment. He leaned close and said nothing. He simply waited. "She's running," Roman said under his breath. "Direction?" Dominic asked, equally quiet. "Northwest. The Darkwell." A pause. "I'll have trackers ready within the hour." 10 minutes, Roman said. "I want every tracker we have in the field within 10 minutes." Dominic moved. Roman kept smiling at the nobles who pressed forward with their congratulations, shaking hands and accepting toasts and performing with the mechanical precision of a man who has been performing his entire life, while inside the bond grew thinner with every passing moment, and the terror in his chest grew louder. Hold on, he thought, pouring the thought into the bond with everything he had. Josie, please, hold on." No answer came. Roman found her room at midnight. He told himself he was going to check, just check, that perhaps she had not gone far, that perhaps the Bond's movement had slowed, that perhaps there was a note, an explanation, something that told him she was all right. The room was stripped bare, not ransacked, not abandoned in panic, stripped with the careful, quiet efficiency of someone who had decided there was nothing here worth leaving a mess over. The narrow bed was made with sharp precision. The small shelf above it was empty. The worn boots she kept beside the door were gone, and the only thing missing that mattered was the flower from the windowsill. Roman stood in the doorway of that small, empty room for a long time. The castle was still celebrating 3 floors below. The sounds of music and laughter drifting upward in a way that felt surreal, almost cruel. He looked at the empty windowsill where the pressed flower had sat, and something opened in his chest that he had spent 32 years learning to keep closed. She had taken it. She had been in enough pain to leave everything, and she had still taken the flower. Dominic appeared in the corridor behind him, quiet as always. "Trackers are ready," he said. "They've found a scent trail through the east garden and out the outer gate. She's heading into the dark well." Roman nodded slowly, not turning from the empty room. "Or she'll know we're following," Dominic said. "Good," Roman said. "I want her to know." He turned away from the room and did not look back at it. Looking back was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. He had a direction. He had trackers. He had a Bond that was still, barely, alive. That was enough to start with. But before Roman ran into the dark, there was a conversation he needed to have. Victor Ashcroft was in his advisory chambers on the castle's east wing, apparently engaged in paperwork, his grey-streaked hair neat, his expression composed in the particular way of a man who has anticipated this moment and prepared for it. He was perhaps 60, lean and precise, with pale eyes that assessed everything and revealed nothing. He had served the Stoneheart family for 30 years. He had helped Roman navigate the brutal first years after his father's death, when Roman was 24, and drowning. Roman had trusted him with things he had trusted to almost no one else. That made what Roman now understood about him feel like a wound in a place that was already sore. "Where is she?" Roman said from the doorway. Victor set down his pen without hurry. "Your king, the ceremony was just—" "I'm not asking about the ceremony. I'm asking about Josie." A pause. Victor's expression did not change, which was itself an answer. "She has made her choice, it seems. I understand it's— You told me the council would execute her." Roman stepped into the room and closed the door. His voice was completely level. That was the most dangerous thing about Roman Stoneheart. He was quietest when he was furthest from calm. "You showed me a preliminary vote count. You gave me 3 days to decide, and told me that agreeing to the match with the Redcliffe family was the only way to protect her life. And I believed you, because I trusted you." Victor was silent. Was any of it true? Another silence, carefully shaped. "The council does have concerns," Victor said finally. "A kitchen worker with no bloodline, no pack name, no political value. The match would have created instability. The noble families would have— That's not what I asked." Victor looked at him steadily. "I made a decision on behalf of this kingdom's stability. The same decisions I have made for 30 years. The same decisions that kept this pack together when your father died and left a 24-year-old with no allies and a dozen enemies." Roman held his gaze. "Find her," he said quietly. "Or not with your people. Not with anyone loyal to you. My trackers, my guard, and me. And Victor, if I learn that there is more to this than what you have told me tonight, the conversation we have after will be very different from this one." He left Victor in the lamplight and walked back to the courtyard where Dominic and the trackers were waiting. The night was cold and very dark. The Darkwell forest stretched out to the northwest like a held breath. Roman stripped off his coat, handed it to Dominic, and shifted. His wolf rose through him like a tide, larger and darker than most, with amber eyes that burned even in animal form. The bond pulled northwest. He ran. The days that followed were the worst of Roman's adult life, which was saying something, or because his adult life had contained several experiences he would not wish on his enemies. He tracked her through the Darkwell for 4 days, before losing the scent near a section of the forest where a river ran close to the surface and scattered trails in every direction. His trackers, who were the best in the territory, spread out and found nothing. Not a broken branch, not a disturbed patch of earth. It was as if she had simply stepped off the edge of the world. He searched villages at the forest's borders. He sent Dominic to the outposts with descriptions. He sat with maps every night until his eyes blurred, tracing and retracing possible routes, trying to reconcile the fading signal of the bond with the geography of a forest that had never been fully mapped. The castle noticed. Of course it did. Castles always notice. The whispers started within a week. The king had abandoned his new queen on the first morning of their matched union to chase a servant girl into the forest. The king was enchanted. The king had lost his mind. The kitchen girl had used some kind of manipulation to cloud his judgment, which was how people with no imagination explained things they couldn't understand. Maisie Redcliffe said nothing publicly. She conducted herself with composure and quiet dignity, which Roman respected even as he was too preoccupied to give it the attention it deserved. He would think about Maisie later, when the most urgent fire was put out. He would find a way to make things right with her, too. But first, Josie. Always, in every quiet moment, his mind returned to Josie. He thought about her in the kitchen with her sleeves rolled up, utterly unbothered by his title. He thought about the way she had listened to him talk about his father without offering empty reassurances, just quiet presence, and the occasional honest observation that landed more gently than comfort. He thought about the bond at its fullest, warm, steady, like sunlight on stone. He thought about the empty windowsill. She took the flower. It was the fact he returned to most often, because it told him something critical. She had left in devastation, not in hatred. Hatred does not carry the thing that hurts it. Devastation does, because it cannot bear to let go of what it loved. She was not gone because she stopped loving him. She was gone because she believed he had stopped loving her, and that was a lie he was going to spend everything he had to correct. On the 18th day, out in a small village at the western edge of the Darkwell forest, an innkeeper remembered a young woman matching Josie's description. Dark hair, quiet eyes, moving with the particular stillness of someone who didn't want to be remembered. She had asked about paths into the forest's interior. The old territories, the innkeeper said. The place where the deep wood began and the maps gave up. She had asked specifically about a waterfall. Roman was moving before the innkeeper finished speaking. The Darkwell forest did not feel dangerous from the outside. From the outside, it was simply trees, dense and old, the kind of old that has nothing to prove, dark-barked and deep-rooted, with a canopy so thick that the light came through in small, scattered pieces rather than anything resembling sun, 'cause it smelled of wet earth and pine resin, and something older than either, a mineral scent like stone that has held water for a very long time. Josie had spent the first 3 days feeling nothing except the mechanical forward motion of surviving. She moved during the day, found shelter at dusk, ate the food she had carried until it ran out, and then foraged with the careful, anxious attention of someone who had read enough about forest plants to know which ones would not hurt her, but not quite enough to be confident. She slept in short intervals, always with her back against something solid, always half listening to the sounds of the forest rearranging itself in the dark. She did not let herself think about Roman. When the bond pulsed, which it did stubbornly, with a frequency that told her he was looking, that he had not simply accepted her departure and turned his attention to his new queen, she pushed back against it with everything she had. She built the wall by instinct rather than technique, the way you cover a wound before you understand why covering it matters. She layered her hurt on top of the connection, like stones, one by one, until the signal from his side was muffled to something she could ignore if she worked at it. She did not know then that this was extraordinary. She did not know that ordinary wolves could not do this. The rogues found her on the third morning. She was moving along the bank of a shallow stream when she heard them, not the sound of wolves in nature, which is largely silence and careful movement, but the particular sound of wolves who want to be heard. Deliberate. A warning shaped like a casual approach, and she counted 3 distinct sets of footsteps in the undergrowth before she stopped walking. When they stepped into the open, she held her ground. There were 3 of them, all male, all bearing the signs of the Darkwell's particular education, scars that had healed imperfectly, eyes with the feral brightness of wolves who had been outside pack structure long enough that the old social instincts had either sharpened into something predatory or worn away entirely. Their leader was broad-shouldered, with a shaved head, and the slow, deliberate movement of someone who has never been in a hurry because he has never needed to be. He smiled at her in a way that made her skin go cold. "Lost?" he said, like the word was a joke with a punchline she wouldn't enjoy. Josie shifted. She had shifted only a handful of times in her life. Her wolf was present but untested, and she had never had reason to test it in a context where the testing mattered. But she shifted now, and she held the ground between herself and the 3 rogues with a steadiness that surprised her even as she felt it. Her wolf was small compared to theirs. She knew that. They knew that. She bared her teeth anyway. The rogue leader laughed. It was not a kind sound. He took a step forward, and the other 2 spread out on either side with the practiced ease of wolves who have done this before, and Josie understood with a cold, clear certainty that she had approximately 30 seconds before the situation moved past the point of maneuver. The 4th wolf came from nowhere. At one moment the clearing held 4 wolves and a rapidly deteriorating set of odds. The next, something large and silver-grey moved through the air from the eastern edge of the trees and hit the rogue leader with a force that sent him crashing into the trunk of an ancient oak with a crack that silenced every bird in a 50-meter radius. The other 2 reacted. They were fast. He was faster. It lasted perhaps 90 seconds. When the forest went quiet again, 3 rogues lay on the ground, alive but comprehensively incapacitated, and a silver-grey wolf stood in the center of the clearing, looking at Josie with eyes the precise blue of deep winter. Then it shifted. Bones reshaped with the unhurried ease of something that had performed this particular transformation hundreds of thousands of times. What emerged was a man. Tall, lean, with silver-threaded hair that should have looked strange on a face no older than 40, and instead looked simply correct. Like someone who had been silver since long before the idea of youth had much meaning to him. His eyes in human form were still that deep winter blue, and they were fixed on Josie with an expression she could not quite name. Not threat, not welcome. Something more complicated than either. Recognition. "You're a long way from anywhere safe," he said. His voice was even, unhurried. A voice that had learned patience across a great deal of time. "I noticed," Josie said, which, in retrospect, was either very brave or very inadvisable for someone who had just been saved. A pause. Something shifted in those winter eyes, almost amusement, but older and quieter than amusement usually was. "You held your ground," he said. "Could against 3 rogues you had no practical chance of defeating. Do you know why? Because running would have been worse. Because something in you," he said carefully, "does not know how to present as prey. That is not a trained quality. It is an inherited one." He looked at her for another long moment. "My name is Everett Northwood. I have been in this forest for a very long time. Come with me. You need to eat a proper meal, and there are things you need to understand about yourself. Why would I trust you? Because I just dismantled 3 wolves to ensure you have the option of not trusting me," he said simply. "And because the alternative is spending another night in the forest, alone with the kind of suppressed bond energy that those rogues could probably smell from a quarter mile. You're broadcasting." Josie stared at him. "You're broadcasting what?" "Pain," he said quietly. "And something considerably rarer than pain. Come." Everett's dwelling was behind a waterfall, not beside it. Behind it, through a curtain of white water that dropped from a ledge perhaps 8 meters up and hit the dark pool below with a sound like continuous, steady thunder. Behind the falling water, a narrow passage led into a cavern that opened, unexpectedly, into a space large enough to stand in and breathe in and feel, for the first time in 3 days, something approximating safe. There was a fire. There was a sleeping area. There were shelves of what appeared to be a century's worth of accumulated objects: books, dried herbs, stones, small carved figures. The accumulated texture of a very long life lived in careful isolation. Everett fed her without ceremony. Stew, bread, to water from a stone container that was cool and clean. He said very little while she ate, which she was grateful for, because she was not ready for questions, and she suspected he already had a great many. After she had eaten, he sat across from her and looked at her in that unsettling way, like a man doing quiet mathematics. "I knew someone with your eyes once," he said finally. "Not the color, the quality, the way they see past the surface of things. I don't know what that means. I know you don't." He was quiet for a moment. "Sleep first. There is time for difficult truths tomorrow. The forest won't reach you here, and whoever is searching for you won't find this place unless they know exactly where to look." Josie wanted to argue. She wanted to ask questions about who he was, about what he had seen in her eyes, but about how long he had been in this forest and why. But exhaustion was a physical weight pressing her toward the bedroll in the corner, and her body, which had been running on nerve and momentum for 3 days, had reached its limit. She lay down. The bond pulsed once, faint and distant, through the wall she had built. She pressed her hand to her chest and held it there until the pulse faded. "I'm not going back," she said quietly, to the cavern ceiling, to the sound of the waterfall, to no one in particular. From across the fire, Everett said nothing. But in the way he said nothing, she had the distinct impression that he disagreed. Morning came into the cavern, the way it came into everything behind the waterfall, filtered through falling water, soft and blue-grey, without hard edges. Josie woke to the smell of something warm and the sound of Everett moving with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had made tea in this space so many times that his hands knew the steps without his attention. He set a cup beside her before she was fully upright, then returned to the fire and sat with his own cup and waited. This, she was learning, was how Everett operated. He did not begin conversations. He created the conditions for them. "Tell me what you know about yourself," he said eventually. "That's a broad question. Start anywhere." Josie held her cup with both hands and thought about what honest meant in this context. "I know I have no pack, no family. I grew up in an orphanage on the southern border, run by a headmistress who disliked me from the first week and never gave me a reason. I know I am a wolf, but I've never been trained and never run with a pack. I know I can feel things from people that I shouldn't be able to feel. Emotions, intentions. I always know when someone is lying. Everett nodded slowly. What else? Animals follow me. They always have. At the castle, the stable horses would come to the fence when I walked past, even the ones that didn't let anyone else near them. The ravens would land near me at the kitchen windows. She paused. The headmistress used to call me strange. She said it in the way people say things they mean to be an insult, but are actually afraid of. She was afraid, Everett confirmed. She probably could not have told you why. But wolves sometimes feel the presence of certain bloodlines the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. They don't know what they're sensing. They just know it is something they don't entirely understand. Josie set down her cup. What am I? Everett looked at her for a moment with those winter eyes. Then he said, Have you heard of the Dawn-Blooded? She had not. He told her. The story took time, and he told it carefully, without embellishment but without omission, the way someone tells a story they have had 200 years to consider and have not yet made peace with. The Dawn-Blooded were a bloodline of wolves who had existed, as far back as the oldest pack records went, alongside and slightly outside of the ordinary wolf social structure. Not warriors, not pack leaders. Something quieter and more unsettling than either. They were born with the capacity to perceive emotional truth, not merely intuition, but actual sight, the ability to read the feeling beneath the word, or the intention beneath the action. They could sense the bonds between wolves the way other wolves sensed scent or sound, as something real and present in the world, with texture and light and weight. And in some cases, the rarest cases, they could do more than sense those bonds. They could affect them, not control. The distinction mattered enormously, and Everett made it carefully. Not the ability to manufacture feeling, to create love or loyalty where none existed, to force a bond into being, but the ability to influence what was already there, to strengthen a bond that was genuine, to expose one that was being held together by manipulation rather than truth, and in extreme circumstances, to sever one entirely, to cut a connection that had become a weapon rather than a gift. If the pack councils of 2 centuries ago had not received this information well, the word used in the records of the era was destabilizing. A wolf who could sever bonds could theoretically dismantle a pack's entire social structure. A wolf who could sense truth could expose every political arrangement, every strategic alliance, every carefully maintained fiction that held a ruling class in power. The persecution had been swift, systematic, and thorough. Within 2 generations, the Dawn-Blooded bloodline had been declared extinct. Everett paused here. Josie waited. The line was not entirely extinguished, he said. It was hidden, dispersed. Children born with the gift were taught to suppress it, to present as ordinary wolves, to never speak of what they could sense. Over generations, or the knowledge of what they were, was lost, even within the families carrying the blood. It became simply a strange quality. The child who always knew when the adults were lying, the girl the horses came to, the boy who could sense grief in a room before anyone spoke. He looked at her steadily. You are Dawn-Blooded, Josie. You have been, all your life, without knowing what that meant. The silence that followed was long. Josie sat with the information, the way you sit with something that explains everything, and changes everything, and costs something, even as it clarifies. The headmistress, the horses, the way she had always known, always, when someone was telling her a comfortable lie instead of the truth. The bond with Roman, how vivid it was, how present, how much more than she had assumed a normal bond would feel. The wall she had built, or the way she had dimmed the connection by instinct, the way she had muffled his presence with her own pain, I've been doing it my whole life, she said quietly. Yes. And I almost severed the bond entirely. When I was running. Yes, a pause. It is a testament to its genuine strength that you could not do it completely, even with considerable effort. A bond that is manipulated or politically constructed would have snapped cleanly under that kind of pressure. Yours held because it is real. Josie looked at the fire for a long moment. Can you teach me to control it? That is why I asked you to stay, Everett said. The weeks that followed were unlike anything in Josie's experience. Everett was not a gentle teacher. He was precise, patient in the way that very old things are patient, without urgency, or without the particular anxiety of someone working against a clock, but not soft. He did not cushion difficult realizations or praise effort for its own sake. He taught her the way the forest taught things, by presenting the truth of a situation and waiting for understanding to arrive. She learned to call the sight deliberately, rather than having it arrive like weather. She learned the difference between the passive awareness she had lived with her whole life and the active, focused use of the ability. The way you learn the difference between hearing and listening, seeing and looking. She learned to read the bonds between wolves as visible things, threads of light and color that told her the nature of the connection they represented. And she reached, tentatively, and then with growing certainty, toward the bond connecting her to Roman. It was still there. She had half expected, in the weeks of silence, that it might have faded to nothing, that his side of the connection turned toward Macy Redcliffe and the obligations of the grand ceremony might have simply dimmed and stopped. The thought of that had sat in her chest like a stone, cold and heavy and terrible. But the bond was alive, frayed in places, like rope that has been pulled very hard in multiple directions, dim from the wall she had built and the distance between them, but alive. The thread, when she looked at it with the sight fully open, was gold threaded through with grey. Gold for what was genuine, grey for everything they had both been carrying. She sat beside the waterfall on an afternoon in the third week, and held her hand up and watched the bond drift from her palm like thread in moving air, as she felt, for the first time since the night of the ceremony, something more complicated than pure hurt. She felt the question of what she was going to do. Behind her, Everett sat at a careful distance. He's getting closer, he said. I know. What will you do when he reaches the forest's edge? Josie was quiet for a long moment, her eyes still on the golden thread. I don't know yet, she said honestly. That, said Everett, is the most truthful answer you have given since you arrived. Roman reached the waterfall on the 23rd day. He came alone, or nearly. Dominic waited at the forest's edge, at Roman's instruction, because Roman had the particular instinct of a man who understood that there were conversations that needed to happen without witnesses. He found the passage behind the falls by the smell of wood smoke and the pull of the bond, which had strengthened marginally as he closed the distance, like a signal growing less faint as you walk toward its source. He did not attempt the door. He stood outside the cavern entrance, the waterfall misting cold against his skin, and said nothing for a moment. Then simply, I know she's here. I'm not asking to take her. I'm asking to be heard. Everett Northwood appeared in the entrance with the composed stillness of a very old wolf who has assessed threat levels across several centuries and is not particularly impressed by the one in front of him. She doesn't want to see you, he said. I know. And you came anyway. Yes. Everett studied him with those winter eyes. There was a quality to his gaze that Roman had never encountered, a kind of seeing that went past the surface of things and seemed to be reading something underneath. It was, Roman realized, the same quality he had always felt from Josie, magnified, and centuries more deliberate. Come in, Everett said. She's not here, as I told you. I moved her when I sensed you approaching. But you can say what you have to say, and I will pass it to her. Whether she chooses to respond is not my decision." Roman stepped inside. The fire was low. The cavern smelled of herbs and old paper and the particular mineral cleanness of constant moving water. Roman sat where Everett indicated and spent a moment looking at the space, the shelves, the accumulated objects of a very long life, and felt, suddenly, the weight of what he was about to ask. "How long have you been here?" he said. "Long enough," said Everett, "to have met your great-great-grandmother. Long enough to have watched the Stoneheart line build something impressive and then spend several generations making it brittle." He sat across from Roman. "Long enough to know that the last Alpha King who encountered a dawn-blooded wolf made a choice that has taken 500 years to create the conditions to undo." Roman went still. "She told you about the bond." "She didn't need to. I recognized what she was the moment I saw her." A pause. "Do you know what a dawn-blooded wolf is?" "No," Everett told him. Roman listened without interrupting. He had the quality, when receiving important information, of going very quiet, not the quiet of disengagement, but the quiet of someone committing everything they hear to a place where it will be kept carefully. When Everett finished, the silence lasted for almost a minute. "She's been doing this her whole life," Roman said finally. "Without knowing. Without any support, without any community, without anyone to tell her why she experienced the world the way she did." Everett's voice was even, but something underneath it was not. "Alone, in an orphanage, with a headmistress who feared her without knowing why, and directed that fear at a child." Roman closed his eyes briefly. "And Victor," he said. "Victor knew." Everett nodded once. "Your chief advisor has been in that role for 30 years. He is thorough, he is observant, and he has access to the old pack records that the noble families keep. He would have recognized the signs. He would have understood, when your bond with Josie became apparent, that she was not merely an inconvenient match. She was a dawn-blooded wolf with the potential to do things that political structures depend on preventing." Roman's jaw was tight. "The ultimatum was never about the Council," he said. "The Council has concerns about your match," Everett allowed. "Those concerns are real. But the specific numbers Victor showed you, the specific timeline, the particular framing that made your agreement feel urgent and inevitable, that was Victor's construction, not the Council's organic position." The air in the cavern felt very still. "There's more," Roman said. It was not a question. "The letter sent to Josie on the morning of the ceremony," Everett said, "or delivered by someone who had access to the servants' quarters and knowledge of her schedule. Written in a hand, close enough to yours to pass a brief reading. Telling her you had requested she leave the castle grounds before the ceremony to avoid complications." Roman stared at him. "She thought I sent her away," he said. "She believed when she left that you had decided it was easier if she simply was not there. That you had made the choice to spare yourself the difficulty of her presence rather than spare her the pain of witnessing the ceremony." The sound Roman made was quiet and controlled, and contained something that, in different circumstances, would not have been either. "Lacey Ashcroft," he said. "Victor's daughter. She had the access, the knowledge, and a father who had just spent 3 weeks impressing upon her the urgency of removing Josie from the situation." Roman stood. He did not pace. He had too much control for that. But the energy in the room shifted, the way air shifts before weather arrives. "She left believing I had chosen to abandon her," he said. "Not that I was forced into an impossible position. Not that I was trying to protect her. She left thinking I had simply decided she was inconvenient." "Yes." A long silence. "I need to write to her," Roman said. Everett rose without comment and crossed to one of his shelves, returning with a piece of parchment and a piece of charcoal. He held them out. "I will read it first," he said. "You should know that." "Good," Roman said. "You should. You should read every word and tell me if anything in it is less than completely honest." He took the parchment and sat back down, and for a long time the only sound in the cavern was the waterfall and the quiet scratching of charcoal against old paper. Back at the castle, in the days preceding Roman's arrival at the Darkwell, the situation had been doing what complicated situations always did when left unattended. It was getting worse. Victor Ashcroft had moved with the quiet efficiency of a man managing a crisis he had anticipated. He had spoken to the council elders, carefully, framing Roman's search as a temporary emotional response to the disruption of the ceremony, something that would resolve itself once the Alpha King had time to settle. He had spoken to the noble families, reassuringly, that with the smooth confidence of someone who had been managing political situations for 30 years. He had, in short, been doing what he always did, deciding what was best for the Stoneheart Pack, and then arranging the world around that decision. What he had not managed was Macy Redcliffe. Macy had conducted herself, since the ceremony, with a grace that surprised nearly everyone. She had not sought attention. She had not complained about Roman's absence. She had moved through the castle with the quiet self-possession of someone who was thinking very hard and saying very little, which was not the behavior her family had prepared her for, and was not what Victor had predicted. What Macy had been doing in the days of Roman's absence was talking to Dominic Blackridge. Not about anything suspicious. She had simply identified, and with the astute social reading of someone raised in a politically complex family, that Dominic was the person in this castle who knew the most and said the least. She had asked him questions, gentle, oblique, never directly about Josie, that were designed to assemble a picture from the pieces he allowed her to see. The picture that assembled itself was not the one her family had given her. On the morning of Roman's 22nd day in the forest, Macy found Dominic in the corridor outside the war room and said, "Victor knew about the bond before the ceremony was announced, didn't he?" Dominic looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "That is not something I am in a position to confirm or deny." "That's a confirmation," Macy said. She went back to her chambers and spent the rest of the day in a silence that held, beneath its surface, the specific quality of a person deciding that they have been patient long enough and the time for patience is over. Josie read the letter in the early morning, alone in the smaller cave Everett had moved her to, a narrower space farther behind the falls, where the sound of the water was louder and the light was dimmer, and she had spent 5 nights sleeping in fits and starts, waking in the dark to press her hand against the bond, and then go still again. Everett had given it to her without comment, just the folded parchment, held out across the fire. She had taken it. She had sat with it for a very long time before opening it. The parchment was soft, creased and recreased, the way paper gets when someone has folded and unfolded it many times. She could see, in the multiple crease lines, as the evidence of a letter written and reconsidered, written again, the writing on the outside blurred slightly at one edge where something had pressed against it. A thumb. His thumb. She unfolded it. "Josie, I am not going to begin with an apology. You deserve truth before you deserve comfort, and I would rather give you what you deserve than what feels easier to offer." 6 weeks before the ceremony, Victor Ashcroft came to me privately. He had discovered our bond. He told me that if I didn't agree to the public match with the Redcliffe family, he would bring you before the Pack Council on a charge of manipulating the Alpha Bond. He showed me a preliminary vote count. The numbers were what he needed them to be, though I did not understand at the time how carefully he had arranged that. He gave me 3 days. I believed him. Oh, that is the thing I have to live with. I trusted a man I had trusted for 30 years, and I believed the cage he built around me because he built it with materials I had given him. My care for you, my fear of what the council would do to someone without a pack name or political protection. He knew exactly where I was vulnerable, and he built the door right there. I agreed to the ceremony because I thought it was the only way to keep you alive. I was wrong to agree without telling you. I was wrong to believe that you would be protected by ignorance rather than by truth. I was wrong to think that I could hold both things at once, your safety and my own silence, without one of them breaking. I made the choice alone when it should have been ours to make together, and I have thought about that every hour of every day since you ran. Or what I didn't know, until I found Everett, was the letter that was sent to you on the morning of the ceremony. I didn't write it. I didn't ask for it. I would have given everything I own to have reached you that morning before Lacey Ashcroft's cruelty did. The bond is still alive. I can feel it even through the wall you have built. I want you to know that I feel it as something I am grateful for, not something I expect you to maintain for my sake. It is yours to close if you choose. I will not press against it. I am outside Everett's door. I have been standing here for 2 hours. I will stay as long as you need. If you want me to leave, tell me, and I will go, and I will not come back unless you ask. If you want me to stay, I will be here. I am sorry. Not as a preamble to an argument or a reason to forgive me quickly. Simply sorry, or the way you are sorry for something that cannot be undone and can only be answered by choosing differently from this moment on. Roman Josie folded the letter when she finished reading. Then she unfolded it and read it again. She did this 3 more times over the course of 2 hours, and then she set it down on her knee and looked at the ceiling of the cave and let herself feel the full weight of what was in her chest. She called up the sight. It rose through her like breath, natural now, after weeks of Everett's careful teaching, and the world shifted into the layered version she was still learning to read. She reached toward the bond and found the wall she had built, and she pressed her hands, metaphorically, against it and began to dismantle it, stone by stone. Or the first crack sent a wave of sensation through her, so strong she had to close her eyes. Roman. His grief moved through the bond like deep water. Not dramatic, not performed, but heavy in the way that grief is heavy when it has been carried for a long time, and the person carrying it is not the kind of person who puts it down and cries about it. His guilt sat alongside the grief with a particular texture she recognized, the specific guilt of someone who made a decision with good intentions and is still paying the cost of what it cost someone else. His fear was present too, thin and persistent, the fear of a man who has found something real after a long time without it, and is now standing outside a door in the rain hoping the thing he found will still be there when the door opens. And beneath all of it, so steady she almost missed it in the tide of everything else. Love. Not the love of someone hoping to be forgiven. Not the love of someone calculating an outcome. Just love. Present, enduring, asking nothing and offering everything. The way a fire is warm without requiring you to explain why warmth matters. He was telling the truth. Every word. Josie sat still for a moment with the bond fully open, and Roman's entire emotional reality flowing through the connection between them. And she felt the wall she had built, all that stone, all that careful architecture of hurt, become unnecessary. She stood up. She walked through the inner passage, past the waterfall, and through the outer entrance of the cavern. The air outside was cool and damp with mist from the falls. The light was evening grey, the forest dark beyond the clearing, or she scanned the space and found him immediately. Roman was standing precisely where he had said he would be, in the mist from the waterfall, his dark hair damp against his face, his amber eyes finding hers before she had fully stepped into the space between them. He was wearing a plain, dark coat that was not warm enough for the forest at this hour, and he looked, she thought with a sudden, incongruous rush of feeling, absolutely terrible. He looked real, too. More real than anything had looked in 3 weeks. He did not move toward her. He stood exactly where he was, his hands at his sides, his eyes on her face, and he let her hold the distance. "I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight," he said quietly. His voice was steady, but the steadiness cost him something. "I am asking you to let me stay." Josie looked at him for a long moment, while she kept the sight open, reading every thread of what she saw, the gold of the bond between them, brighter now that the wall was gone, the silver grey of his emotional state, the particular quality of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time, and is simply, finally, choosing to put it down and tell the truth. She stepped back from the entrance. "Come inside," she said. "You look terrible." Something moved across Roman's face. Relief, perhaps, or something beyond relief. The expression of a person who has been bracing against a worst case and is now finding that the ground is still there when they step forward. He crossed the space between them and came through the entrance, and as he passed her, the bond between them blazed from a dim thread to something warm and solid and entirely present, though neither of them said anything about it. They sat by the fire, Everett's fire, which the old wolf had built, and then quietly and pointedly vacated, and they talked. Not quickly, not easily, with the particular careful honesty of two people reconstructing trust from the ground up. He told her everything, without omission. Victor's manipulation, the timeline, the vote count, the morning he had realized the letter she had received was not from him. She told him what it had felt like to believe he had sent her away. She told him about running, about the rogues, about Everett and the Dawn blood, and the weeks of learning what she was. She showed him the sight, briefly, with his permission. Let him see what she saw when she read the bond between them. The gold thread that had survived weeks of separation and walls and grief and still burned. De Roman looked at it for a long time. "That's us," he said. "That's us," she confirmed. He reached across the space between them and took her hand in both of his. He did not say anything else for a moment. He just held her hand, the way you hold something you almost lost, carefully, completely, with the particular attention of someone who will not be careless again. Outside, the mist from the waterfall drifted in the evening air. The bond between them settled into something warm and steady and entirely unlike anything it had been before. Not the hidden, fragile thing it had been in the castle's dark corners, but something that had been tested and had held, and knew now what it was made of. They returned to the castle on a grey morning 3 days later. Not through the servants' gate. Not at midnight. With Josie tucked into a side entrance while the official party entered through the main doors. Through the front gate in the clear morning light, with Dominic and 6 members of the castle guard forming a quiet presence behind them. The castle courtyard stopped what it was doing. Grooms halted mid-task. A servant dropped a bundle of linens and did not immediately retrieve it. A cluster of minor nobles who had been conducting an early morning conversation near the fountain simply went silent, all at once, like birds the moment before a hawk passes overhead. Josie felt the weight of every gaze. She was wearing a gown that Hallie Thornfield had pressed into her arms the moment she stepped through the gate. Deep blue, simply cut, nothing like the elaborate silks that passed as normal court attire, but clean and well made, and precisely, or somehow right. Hallie had wept when she saw Josie, openly, with no apparent concern for dignity. She had pulled Josie into an embrace that communicated several things that would have taken a great deal of words to express. And then she had produced the gown from somewhere as if she had been holding it ready. Roman had noticed the exchange. He had not said anything, but the expression on his face, watching Josie in Hallie's arms, watching what it looked like when someone was genuinely glad to have her back, had been quiet and complete. The great hall was summoned. By midday, every noble family in the castle, every advisor, every park elder, what every person of consequence in the Ashcroft territories had assembled in the great space, with its black and silver banners, and its vaulted ceilings, and its particular quality of acoustics that made voices carry farther than expected. They gathered in the anxious clusters of people who know something important is about to happen, and are not certain which direction it will fall. Roman entered from the main doors. Josie walked beside him. The sound in the hall shifted as they entered. Whispers, exhaled breaths, the subtle restructuring of social calculus that a room full of politically attentive wolves performed automatically whenever power walked past them. Eyes moved to Josie with the particular quality of reassessment. She had been the kitchen girl, the servant, the nobody the king had chased into the forest. What they saw now was something they could not quite categorize, and they were not certain how they felt about that. Roman stopped at the center of the hall, where the acoustics were best, and waited for quiet. It arrived within seconds. "I have gathered you here," he said, "to correct a grave injustice, one that I was partly responsible for, and one that ends today." He named Victor Ashcroft. He named Lacey Ashcroft. He laid out everything: the fabricated ultimatum, the manipulated vote count, the forged letter delivered on the morning of the ceremony to ensure that Josie was too far gone to reach before the bond between them became impossible to claim publicly. He laid it out with the specific, evidence-weighted precision of a man who has had 3 days to organize his thoughts and is not interested in drama, the only in the record being clear. The hall received this in progressive stages of shock. Some faces went pale. Some expressions shifted through denial and then reluctant acceptance. Victor Ashcroft, standing near the east wall between 2 members of the guard who had positioned themselves there without ceremony, maintained his composure with the pride of a man who had spent 30 years building it and was not going to let it go now. "You acted on what you believed was best for this kingdom," Roman said, looking at him directly. "I understand the logic. I even understand the calculation. But you made a decision that belonged to me, and you made it by building a cage around my choices, and you did so in a way that caused direct harm to someone in my care. That is not service. That is control." Victor said nothing. Lacey Ashcroft, standing beside her father, was very pale. She was perhaps 23, young enough that the full weight of what she had done had been arriving in pieces across the weeks since Josie's disappearance, settling with increasing heaviness as each piece came. She looked at Josie across the hall with an expression that mixed shame with something genuinely complicated, and Josie, with the sight open, read the truth of it clearly. Lacey had not acted from malice. She had acted from obedience, and she was living in the difficult space of understanding that obedience to a wrong instruction is its own kind of choice. Josie did not hate her for it. She was not quite ready to tell Lacey that yet. But she noted it. Roman turned to Macy Redcliffe. Macy stood near the front of the hall with her mother beside her, her posture composed, her expression containing something that looked, beneath its careful surface, like genuine relief. Roman addressed her with the respect of someone who understood that she had been placed in an impossible position through no decision of her own. "Macy Redcliffe came to this arrangement in good faith," he said to the assembled hall, believing herself to be a genuine match rather than a political instrument. "She has conducted herself throughout with grace that she was not obligated to offer. She deserves better from this house than she received, and I intend to ensure that her family name carries no shadow from the events of this season." Macy inclined her head. Her eyes moved briefly to Josie's, and something passed between them. Not quite an apology, not quite a thank you, something more honest than either. the acknowledgement of two people who had been moved around a board like pieces and had found, in the end, some ground of their own to stand on. "Victor Ashcroft," Roman said, and his voice was very quiet now, which was the most serious it ever was, "is removed from his advisory position immediately. He will leave the castle grounds by dawn tomorrow. He will not hold a position of influence within this territory again." Victor bowed his head, once. "Lacey Ashcroft," Roman said, "acted under her father's direction. She is young. She will remain in the castle under supervised responsibilities for a period the council will determine. I will not let the consequences of a parent's choices fall entirely on a daughter who is still learning the difference between loyalty and compliance." He paused and looked at the assembled hall. "And now," he said, "there is one more thing." He turned to Josie. The hall went very still. "This is Josie," Roman said. His voice was clear and simple. "She has no pack name, because no pack has yet been worthy of giving her one. She is dawn-blooded, a bloodline this territory declared extinct out of fear 2 centuries ago, and will now have the responsibility of learning to deserve. She has survived the Darkwell Forest alone. She has discovered the truth of what she is, and learned to carry it with more grace than most people carry gifts they have had their whole lives. She is my mate, my choice, and from this day forward, she is your queen." A silence. Then Dominic Blackridge, from the back of the hall, began to clap. Not the formal measured applause of court ceremony, a real sound with both hands, with the energy of a man who has been quietly rooting for a particular outcome for a very long time. A few others joined, tentatively. Then more. Hallie Thornfield, standing among the castle staff at the hall's eastern edge, was crying so openly and with such complete lack of concern for appearances that the young apprentice beside her looked genuinely alarmed. The sound grew. Josie stood in the center of it, and felt something she had spent most of her life not letting herself feel, for fear it would be taken away. She let herself feel it anyway. The claiming ceremony took place that evening, when the moon was up and the first stars were visible, and the castle's stone walls held the day's warmth before releasing it into the cool night air. It was small, by design. At the sacred grove outside the castle, an old circle of standing stones at the forest's edge, where the Stoneheart line had made its most serious promises since before anyone currently living could remember, held perhaps 30 people. The ones who mattered. Dominic and a handful of the guard. Hallie Thornfield, who was still at intervals crying. Everett Northwood, who had appeared at the castle gate that afternoon, with his pack over his shoulder, and his winter eyes carrying the particular expression of a man completing something he had started a very long time ago. Macy Redcliffe was not present, which was correct and appropriate, and she had not expected to be. The moon was full and very bright. Roman stood at the center of the stone circle and looked at Josie across the space between them, and the bond between them, visible now to Josie in all its full dawn-blood clarity, was the most beautiful shade of gold she had ever seen. Not perfect. Still carrying the marks of everything it had been through. The grey of the weeks apart, the stretched places, the evidence of a connection that had been tested very thoroughly, but genuine, entirely, unquestionably genuine. The words they spoke to each other were old. Older than the castle, older than the Stoneheart name. Simple words, the kind that do not require embellishment. Before the moon and the stars, before the spirits of every wolf who came before us, I claim you. I give you my heart, my life, my truth. From this moment until my last breath, I am yours. Roman's mark, when it came, was a moment Josie had imagined. Cautiously, or in her most private thoughts, and the reality of it was nothing like imagination. It was more. The sensation moved through her like the bond at its fullest, all warmth and certainty, and the specific relief of becoming something you were always meant to be. She felt his wolf settle into a completeness she recognized from their best moments, before everything fell apart and they had to build it back. She marked him in return. He exhaled against her shoulder. A long, full exhale, like a man setting down something he had been carrying since before he knew what carrying it meant. "My queen," he said quietly. "My king," she said, and felt the words settle into truth. Behind them, in the small gathered circle, Dominic cleared his throat, and Hallie cried again, and Everett Northwood watched with those winter eyes that had seen 500 years of the world, and something in them was quieter than it had been. The weeks that followed were the beginning of everything different. Victor's departure left a gap in the castle's advisory structure that Roman filled deliberately and slowly, with the particular care of someone who has learned the cost of trusting the wrong kind of competence. He did not appoint a single replacement. He built a council, intentionally diverse, chosen for honesty rather than family connection or political alignment. Everett agreed, with conditions and considerable expressed skepticism, to serve as an advisor on matters relating to unusual wolf abilities. He installed himself in a tower room at the castle's east wing and proceeded to be consistently inconvenient in exactly the ways that were most useful. "You understand," he told Roman on the day of the agreement, "that I will tell you when you are wrong." "I know," Roman said, "and you will not find it pleasant." "Probably not." "Good. Then we understand each other." Josie began, carefully and without any official declaration, the work of finding other wolves in the territory who had been suppressing or hiding unusual abilities. She started with what Everett knew: names in the old records, bloodlines that had scattered when the persecution came, families who carried the capacity in diluted form without understanding it. She wrote letters. She visited, with Dominic's company, the outlying villages where wolves with strange qualities had been living quietly on the edges of pack society for want of a language for what they were. The response, slowly and then with gathering momentum, was extraordinary. There were more of them than anyone had known to count. Hallie Thornfield was formally appointed head of castle domestic affairs, which she received with the specific expression of someone who is deeply pleased and is going to be insufferable about it at intervals. She cried at the appointment, which surprised no one. Maisie Redcliffe, in the months following the events of the ceremony, became someone that Josie had not anticipated. She appeared one afternoon at the door of the small study, where Josie was working through correspondence from wolves who had responded to her letters, and she stood in the doorway with the composed, careful posture of someone who has rehearsed an approach and is now executing it with every scrap of nerve she has. "I wanted to say that I am sorry," Maisie said. "I didn't know about the bond, but I was glad to be a queen, and I did not ask the questions that would have told me something was wrong. That is not the same as being innocent." Josie looked at her for a long moment. "Sit down," she said. "There is tea, if you want it." Maisie sat. They talked for an hour. It was not easy, and it was not comfortable, and it was not the beginning of a friendship, exactly. But it was honest, and honesty was a foundation that Josie had learned, over the past months, to value above almost everything else. 6 months after the night of the ceremony, but on an evening when the first real cold of winter was settling over the Ashcroft territories, and the castle fires were burning in every room, Josie found Roman in the kitchen. It was past midnight. She had come down because she could not sleep. Old habit, old comfort. The pull of the one space in the castle where she had always felt entirely herself. She had expected to find the kitchen empty and dark, the fire banked, the particular silence of a room that holds the memory of the day's noise. Instead, she found Roman sitting on the counter. He was in a plain, dark shirt, with the collar undone, wearing no crown and no formal coat, with the kind of unguarded tiredness on his face that he only ever allowed in spaces where he trusted that no one would ask it to be something else. He looked up when she came in, or something in his expression settled. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Never could," she said. She put the kettle on. He watched her move through the kitchen with the ease of someone who knows a space the way you know a language, fluently, without thinking, the body making the right choices while the mind is elsewhere. When she set a cup beside him and took her own and leaned against the counter opposite, there was no urgency in the silence between them. No weight. Just the fire and the night and the steam rising from the cups. "Are you happy?" Roman asked. He always asked. She had come to understand that he would always ask, that the question was not an expression of doubt, but of the particular care of a man who had spent too long in a world where people's actual states were obscured behind what was expected of them. He needed to know. He would always need to know. Josie considered it honestly, the way she considered everything. "I am home," she said. "That's better than happy. That's permanent." Roman looked at her across the kitchen, across the counter, where they had first talked, across the fire that had burned on hundreds of nights before, and would burn on hundreds more. With an expression she had come to know and love and carry like a light she could find in the dark. He reached across the space and took her hand. Outside the kitchen window, the Darkwell forest was quiet under winter stars. The bond between them glowed warm and steady in the dark, visible to Josie's dawn-blood eyes as a thread of pure gold. No grey remaining, no frayed edges, no evidence of anything except something genuine and tested and entirely unbreakable. She curled her hand around his. The fire crackled. The night held them. And in the Ashcroft territories, under a king who had learned the difference between power and love, things were, slowly and imperfectly, and with the particular hope that comes from choosing truth over convenience, changing.